Is divided up into countries. Areas with unique cultures, different races and religions. But what truly makes a country is a border. A line on a map created by people. Most of us have travelled and have had to go through the hassle of border checks and visa applications. But what if we didn't have to? What if the maps were wiped clean? Do we need borders? Do they help or hinder us? What would the world be like if you could travel anywhere freely? Don't forget to hit that poll button and cast your vote. Let's take a look at borders. We should start by correctly defining a border. A border can be a real or an artificial line. This line separates geographic areas and political boundaries. They separate countries, states, provinces, counties, cities and towns. A border shows the area that a particular government controls. The governments of these regions can only create and enforce laws within these drawn lines. But borders are changing all the time. These changes can be a result of political agreements or changes in religious beliefs, even war. People can usually move freely within their own country's borders, however, may not be allowed to cross into a neighbouring country. But when neighbouring countries have similar wealth and political systems, their borders may be open and undefined. The EU is a great example of this. With Brexit on everyone's mind, do you think a single Europe was a good idea? At the opposite end of the scale, we have the Korean demilitarized zone, the border between the communist north and the democratic south. This being the most heavily militarized border in the world, separating the two countries with barbed wire fences, landmines and armed guards. Citizens of most countries must have a passport and official permission to enter the north, and North Koreans must also seek official permission before they leave the secretive nation. Each country has its own rules about who may travel, work and reside within its borders. Visas and work permits are government documents issued to non-citizens. These can limit the types of work or travel that people may do in a country. The United States issues green cards, officially known as permanent residence cards. These allow non-Americans to live and work inside the borders of the US, and they are protected by its laws. Many illegal immigrants have none of these things and therefore are often exploited. Mexicans crossing the border in the US highlights the problems this can cause. President Trump is planning to address this issue with his infamous wall. Border protection is taken very seriously. Nearly all countries have a military or law enforcement presence along their borders. The main reason to keep out invaders. Although in this day and age of cameras and drones, this is not much more than theatre. Sometimes borders serve to keep a country's citizens in. Most governments with closed borders are not democratic. Many times political borders divide groups of people who share a common religion, culture or ancestry, even language. The border between North Korea and South Korea, for example, is purely a political one. The Korean people share a united history, culture and language, yet their country is divided. Germany was once divided between East and West from 1949 to 1989, and just like the Korean border, this was purely political. Germany was reunified in 1990 and that border disappeared. Other times, one ethnic group may wish to break off and form its own independent state, this often leading to civil war. So with billions being spent on manning these borders, and they are constantly changing, is there anyone trying to remove them altogether? Dreams of a borderless world are not new, going all the way back to ancient Greece and Plutarch. Plutarch claimed that in exile, Socrates considered himself not just an Athenian, but instead a citizen of the cosmos. And later in history, Europeans thought the communist ideals of universal labour and solidarity drew heavily on an idea of a world without borders. Workers of the world unite, cried Marx. The solution to endless wars, some argued, was to eliminate borders in favour of a transnational governance. H.G. Wells penned the science fiction novel The Shape of Things to Come. It envisioned borders eventually disappearing and an enlightened world government. Many believe this plan is being carried out today, politicians being maneuvered by a shadowy hand to create a new world order. But borders are still here, and they do not seem to be going anywhere soon. We find that formal borders do not create differences, but they reflect them. If the elites continue in their attempts to erase borders, it may both be futile and destructive. This idea has more to do with political and corporate interest than that of your average man or woman. Most everyday people do not have such grand plans. However, we have had a glimpse of a borderless world. The internet, the sharing of information and ideas, not hindered by borders or the need to travel. And for the most part, we have seen it used for good. Social media connecting us regardless of nationality, religious belief, or politics. It has shrunken the world and given us a global mindset. This freedom is often under threat from governments who wish it to be kept closed and regulated. Governments, it seems, have an interest in keeping borders for control, more than that of protecting a country's sovereignty. Those who have power will argue that they are protecting the land, the people, the businesses. But they are really creating a situation to justify their own existence, using the Hegelian dialectic. If a border is expanded, they seem rather happy to accept that, as long as they have the control. Today they have lost that control. Mass migration is taking place as people are fleeing many regions due to wars and lack of economic opportunities. This situation has been created by the systems, governments, that have been put in place, and they are failing. But in their failure, they find yet another reason to justify their continued grasp of power. The other side of the debate does not fare any better. Those elected and non-elected officials often fail to escape the petty hypocrisy when they talk about a borderless world. As elites, they build walls to insulate themselves. Often the consequences of their policies fall heavily on non-elites who lack the money and the influence to navigate around them. Human migration has always taken place. In fact, if it had not, we as a species would not be found in each corner of the world. That migration created diverse and amazing varieties of cultures and races that we see today. To travel is part of being human. We are built for it. It's in our very DNA. From the first humans leaving Africa to the crossing of the Bering Land Bridge. If we take a step back, we see our success. We have flourished through our migratory habits. If we look a little closer and consider history, we see that many countries that embraced migration grew, expanding their borders, erasing what was there before. Today, if we allowed the same freedom of travel, what would be the result? Let's remove government as an obstacle and put it in the hands of everyday families. The first groups to migrate would often find prejudice and would most likely have to battle their stereotype. But by the second and third generation, these problems are mostly gone. The people become part of that adopted community. We have seen this happen in recent history, with the many groups that have moved into America, Europe and other places. We see the benefits of mixing races and cultures, broadening ideas, creating opportunities for people, from the new takes on ethnic foods and the creation of restaurants, to fashion and music. New opportunities abound. If we see this liberal ideal continue for 1 or 2 generations, we would find ourselves becoming ever more similar. Racism fades as travel becomes easier and easier. More and more multicultural children are born until the entire world's population shares one big gene pool. Racism and race being a construct of humanity, highlighting the minor differences within our species. We are clearly the same species, but that notion of race or subspecies or breed is something that we created to build borders in our minds. And talking of minds, this is where the biggest change will have to come. As we intermingle in this increasingly borderless world, our ties increase, our families covering ever wider regions of the globe. I wonder, will we be so keen to bomb, pillage or loot another place when we have family living there? I think not. Removal of borders and the restraints they put on us could be the very thing that ushers in that universal dream of world peace. Borders are to countries what fences are to neighbors. Borders amplify that innate human desire to own and protect property and physical space. Unfenced borders enhance friendship among the unfriendly. When fortified, they help keep the peace. Do you think this is true? Do you think the future lies with a borderless planet?